the code you write is technical debt by definition. The best code you can write is the code you don't write. Sometimes delivering a feature is going to buy time, run away to the business. You pay the salaries, which includes yourself, right? So you really need to find a balance there. You can go for all the technical excellence you want, but if you don't deliver the feature that is going to make the business sell to the users, then yeah, it's pointless. Saying no is also a sign of seniority. It's more about negotiating it. What is the benefit of this feature? If there is another way we can tackle that.
If this cycle of creating goes faster and faster, then we do need to step back and see what can we simplify to make something that is scalable for the future in the end, but also digestible for people until we get to a point that we don't need to do that anymore. Joining me today is Alessandro Mautone, senior software engineer over at Aquablu, and we discuss one of my favorite topics, balancing technical excellence with delivery speed and business outcomes. And this topic is even more crucial when we're talking about startups and scale-ups. So enjoy. You've been in a lot of organizations in, I feel like, early stages and at a smaller scale than I have experience with. And I'm curious how you view technical excellence on the one side, but also delivering results, working towards business outcomes on the other hand.
Very good question. Yeah, I think this is actually something every engineer should try for and should pay a lot of attention. I think in the past what I've seen is people focusing either on one or the other. Mm-hmm. Usually as an engineer, software engineer, they focus more in the craftsmanship of the code. Yeah. Forgetting about the business context. Mm. So that I believe that the truth is in the balance. Okay. But that also changes based on the company you are in and the business you are in, like you said. Actually, back at WeTransfer was really a really nice journey because I joined it when it was essentially entering the scale up phase. Mm-hmm. And I believe Aquablu is in a similar stage. That's also one of the reasons I joined it. I really enjoyed that part. And so, when you're at the beginning, especially in a startup, maybe you have an idea that is sort of validated, but you didn't find yet the product market fit. Mm. And in that case, you really want to focus on delivering something fast, maybe not super polished to validate first the idea. And then once you have the product that users want, then you focus on craftsmanship and stability.
This is still a very subjective thing then, right? Because I can say this is the right way, architecture-wise or code pattern-wise, but I feel like it's still my opinion. So even if we go for technical excellence, we're going to have a discussion, likely, if we disagree. And then if you take that out of the mix, okay, where is the balance between delivering and technical excellence? There's a lot of discussions, no? On what is the right way.
Yeah, and it's very hard. I don't think I have the answer, the absolute answer. Mm-hmm. It's a very hard one to answer. Mm. But I believe that taking into context, this is something I saw in the past through my career. And I did that myself, by the way, at the beginning. Just ignoring the context, the business context, and just going all in on the technical excellence. There is usually a balance between the two. Sometimes you want to favor speed instead of that. Doesn't mean you're going for an horrible solution. It's just a trade-off, right? You want to go for the good enough solution. And defining good enough, it's a hard part.
That's very hard.
Yeah.
I feel like people also have gotten burned before when you go for speed, let's say, and then you're like, okay, we have product market fit. Let me clean up all this technical debt that we've realized. And then the organization could be like, no. We have to strike while the iron is hot. We have to keep going, right? So then if you compromise on things that actually matter, you might not ever get the chance to do it. So then people kind of put that as early as possible. I'm not compromising on these things because in the past, I've never gotten the chance to straighten that out. I think that's quite hard when people have gotten burned before.
Yeah. But again, if you keep in mind the business context, then I think you're going to have more answers that are going to facilitate your decision. Think about, for example, I started with this at the beginning. But again, choosing speed over the technical excellence part. Sometimes delivering a feature is going to buy time, run away to the business. Mm. And the business is there ultimately to generate revenue, which hopefully generates a profit. Yeah. And with all that, you pay the salaries, which includes yourself, right? So you really need to find a balance there. You can go for all the technical excellence you want, but if you don't deliver the feature that is gonna make the business sell to the users, then it's pointless. Mm-hmm. So you really need to watch out for that. If you're in an established company where there is an established product, and also that, for example, downtime is going to cost you millions because the product is established and used by millions of users, then it's a different story. Then you
Very
can focus.
different.
Yeah. Then probably you will focus way more on the technical excellence. Maybe you have a team dedicated to exploring new experiments, new opportunities, etc. But again, you have the business context with you. So based on that, you can see you can make the trade-offs and you can make informed decisions.
You, as an engineer, you've gone from company to company, and you have this mindset, right? I need to balance technical excellence and results. And I feel like if the team has that mindset, then we're good, right? Because we know we need to balance. So we're going to have, I think, kind of really good outcomes with regards to the work that we're working on. How do you check in with people to see if that have that similar mindset, either through applying to companies or maybe even from a hiring perspective?
Good question. Well, first of all, you can see it from the product itself. For example, with Aquablu, when I joined it, I saw the product, I saw what the guys were doing, and I was like, okay. And also I talked with people. It's really hard to tell, but I could sense what was going on. It's also the type of the company as well. I have been in more corporate companies where everything, it's slowed down by bureaucracy. And that's understandable. But again, it's not really my style. While here, you can see the energy of the people as well. Excitement, the love they put into the product.
Yeah.
Also, going fast doesn't mean, you necessarily compromise on technical excellence. So all those things, it's really hard to get it from a couple of interviews. But if you put all together, then you can get a nice idea. Usually also what I try to do is I even ask to meet the people myself, even if after clearing the interviews, just to get an idea. Because in the end, the agreement is mutual, right?
Yeah.
So if you go there and then it's not a fit, it's going to be bad both for you and for the company as well. So we both want to be in the same place there. We both want to be aligned.
That's really strong that you say, okay, I've passed the interview. I just need to make sure that there's a few things in place that I want to see, right? I feel like especially early stage companies, I've not had the opportunity to join them because I work at a consultancy. So I've only been a consultant. I really like being part of an organization. But yeah, the fact that people know I'm external, in the end, I don't have the same skin in the game. That also means I can say speed is more important, or technical excellence in this case is more important. And I don't face the consequences as much, which is also interesting, right? Because my incentive is completely different. I come in to do a certain job that someone else decided. And I do that job because I also agree, otherwise I wouldn't have joined. But for people that actually join this team, have skin in the game, I feel like alignment on that front is really important. And checking out the product and checking the mindset of the team is a huge part of that.
I totally feel you. I've been there actually. My first experience was in a small agency. So we were doing products for different clients. And like you said, you don't have the skin in the game. And sometimes you don't even have the well, I was pretty junior at the time, so that also played a role. But you don't have even a say in that, the company is establishing that we need to deliver this product fast in order to move to the next one. So you don't really have an opportunity there. Maybe you need to choose just speed and deliver. You still try to do your best for the given client. But yeah, I guess I really like to cultivate products. That's what I love it when I joined WeTransfer. We were working, I say always, for ourselves.
Okay.
Which it's in part true because you have your users, right? You work for them actually. But what I meant is, we are not creating a project and giving it to a client and then delivering it and we start on a new one. We were actually working on the same code base for years. We were evolving the code base. We were planning for that. And you are just cultivating this product. And this is something I really enjoy.
Huge ownership.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could never imagine me joining a startup that I fully believe in and the product taking off and then ever leaving, to be honest, because of that ownership feeling, that ownership and responsibility. When did you decide, okay, some of the organizations that you've moved on from are no longer from me? Did it have to do with growth? Did it have to do with a difference in mindset?
Yeah, it can have different reasons. I can see growth being one of them often. Not for me, I would say. So for example, back at WeTransfer, I don't have any problem saying this, but the direction the company was taking was not really the one I was feeling comfortable with.
Yeah.
I actually left really heartbroken because I really loved working with the people there. I think it's one of the best places I ever worked at so far, if not the best.
You still left.
Yeah. Let's see if Aquablu can do better. But for now, yeah.
It takes guts to leave then still, if you had such a good experience.
Yeah. I really had a hard time. I think, it was a combination of things because, that's when Canyon came in, and I really love bikes, as I said, and I really mean it. I'm an avid biker. So yeah, that kind of made it a bit easier to do the move.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I was saying, the direction of the company was not, and I'm talking about the company, the product and what we were focusing on. I was not really happy about that. I really saw a shift in the last 6 months before leaving. And then I started to think myself, this is either going to have, a certain kind of outcome or another kind of outcome. It's all over the news what happened a couple of years ago when they were sold, and 90% of the people was left home.
Yeah.
I guess I avoided
you were that. Before then, yeah.
I wouldn't say, I saw that happening.
No one does.
No one does.
No one does.
But the direction gave me that feeling. So
some signals.
Yeah. That's why I left eventually, and that could be one of the reasons. That's why I always say keep in mind the business context. It's for your work, for your growth, for your career, for everything. It's really important to keep your eyes open and see how the business goes. I think sometimes we engineers focus too much on the engineering aspect of our job, and we're there for that, so that's expected.
You're an engineer, yeah.
But at the same time, you really need to have context about everything that is happening around you.
It's interesting to me that you've gone from company to company, and the essence, the product of those companies have been completely different, which means that also you build up domain experience in a certain aspect. I've seen product people, they say, I'm an expert in payments. All right, I can go from payment company to payment company, no problem whatsoever, but I'm experienced in payments.
Yeah, I'm happy you pointed out because it's not a coincidence. I really believe into the generalist approach.
Yeah.
You have a generalist and a specialist. Actually, if you look at my career, then you are like, but you focus it on Android, so you are a specialist. But like you said, I've moved through different kind of companies. First the agency, then the product focused one, which is WeTransfer. Then I moved closer to the hardware, was Canyon, and it was not a tech company, so it was actually a completely different experience. Because in WeTransfer, tech was the engine of the company, and that has some consequences, some pros and cons. While at Canyon, the tech part is more of an accessory because the bikes are clearly the engine of the company. And now I moved to Aquablu, which is even closer to the hardware. And I will say tech, it's equally an engine as it is hardware. Because without that, the machine wouldn't run, and they wouldn't invest in this new project. So it's pretty cool to see that happening. And like you say, they expand my domain, and that's something I really enjoy because that keeps me growing from a technical point of view, while also giving me context about how different companies work and how they behave.
When we zoom in on that experience of yours, where you said, okay, this was my fondest experience, especially keeping in mind balancing technical excellence and speed of delivery with business outcomes, what are some of the ingredients that were in there that made it such a fond experience?
I would say talented people for sure. People who care about what you are building. So those are two of the main ingredients. One I haven't experienced it directly, but I believe it's also part of that. It's communication, clear communication. It's unbelievable how often you can, agree on something with another person, and you believe you agreed on the same thing, and then actually you implement two different things. This happened to me literally 3 weeks ago.
Not bad.
So it's that's also really important. So I would say those are the three ingredients, and just care for what you do. If you love what you do, I know it's kind of a cliche because often it's in, but if you love what you do, then you're gonna thrive on it.
Ownership for me has always been a big thing. It's just in my upbringing. I've also seen other people where work is their whole life, and they really take that high level of ownership and responsibility. And if work doesn't go great, it really impacts them. It impacts them to a certain degree that they might burn out, or they might be very jaded towards a similar experience. But it is the skill that we want in the people that we work with, in the environment that we have, which I think is quite interesting, right? Ownership has very big pros, and it can have cons as well that we need to recognize.
Very good point, maybe ownership also connects to another one, which is trust. That's also very important. If you can trust the people you work with, then that's also gonna be set you for success.
Yeah.
But in order to trust people, you really need to have talented people. So among ingredients, I guess when I say talented people, you can link it to hiring. Essentially, it's really important to hire the right people. It's very hard as well. But they say it takes one bad apple to pollute the rest of the environment.
Yeah.
So really be careful there. Take your time if it's needed, and just try to hire the best people, which doesn't mean only the best technical people, but also the people that fits the company, the culture, and has the right mindset to approach the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that if you are in very early stage companies, those are the things you need to look out for, right? Are these talented people, but also you take pride and ownership in the product that you're building. So it's not just you on this smaller scale with regards to the software that you're building. You're building software towards business outcomes, and you want the whole company to succeed. And hopefully you have a good deal that when the company succeeds, it also gives something back.
Yeah.
But that's also part of the risk, right? It's really fun to go. Yeah.
Usually that's why they came up with the stock incentives in tech, right? You then are part of the organization. You really own a stake in it. And that means that whatever impact you have on the company is also going to benefit you directly.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good approach. Then, like you said, hopefully you have a good package because sometimes it can be a small one and then you believe the impact is going to be also hugely beneficial for you, and it's not the case. That also comes with experience, but it's also hard to judge. That's part of the negotiation process whenever you join a company. And I believe it's quite hard, especially in Europe, because I believe here equity is not as big of a part of the package compared to the US. Maybe because of culture, maybe because of, I know for sure also because of legislation. Sometimes it's less favorable here to go for that. Something you need to educate yourself as well.
Yeah, definitely. How have you seen companies, or maybe you've been involved in that as well, get really good talent in the door? Because I'm also wondering, there are different aspects of the hiring process for software engineers specifically. And I'm curious how they're going to evolve nowadays with agentic tooling in the mix. Yeah,
very good one. We are in the middle of it. So it's actually quite hard to look at that. Back in the days, I would say with WeTransfer, well, there the name helped, I believe, because a lot of people wanted to work at WeTransfer. The reason was not only technical excellence, but also the product we were building. We really cared about the community around us. We were trying to do good on top of doing a good product, and that also attracted certain type of people.
People that care.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one way of doing it. Then what else? We have to be honest, the compensation package as well is going to play a role. If you don't pay enough, it's really hard to...
It's not going to happen.
The third one is the idea or the product you are building. If some people is sold on it, that's also going to convince the people to join. It can be, for example, with me at Aquablu, on top of everything, I believe in the product. I really liked it. Those are the ways I will say. And also, if you have talented people, which is a vicious cycle in a positive way. But if you have talented people in place, then you're going to attract the people who wants to work with those people. I'm that kind of person as well. When I hire, for example, I always say, try to hire people that is even smarter than you. Some people see that as a threat. For me, it's not. I see them as someone who can enrich both me personally and the company. What are you going to gain by hiring someone that is less good than you? Allow me the term. You have to aim for the technical excellence also within the people, not only within the code base or the technical aspect of the product. That's also a way of trying to fill your work environment with top talent.
How have you kind of approached the interview process? Because for you, Android as a technical expertise is what you take with you. Your domains are kind of your generalist expertise. Do you fall back on the technical skills, or what do you try and highlight of yourself throughout the interview process?
You mean as an interviewer, right? When hiring? Good question. So first of all, sometimes setting up the interview process doesn't depend entirely on you. So for example, if you want to have a take-home assignment, sometimes it's not up to you to decide if it's allowed or not. That also comes with seniority, I guess. Usually what I try to do is have a sort of technical round. Of course, behavioral interview, that also doesn't involve only me, but other people within the company. But when it comes to the technical round, I really love doing what I call live PR reviews, because then you can see how the person give feedback, receive feedback, what they are looking for within the PR, and so on. That's one of the ways. I really don't do, kind of LeetCode and stuff like that. I don't have anything against it. I know why big companies do it. it's fine. But I believe, again, business context, if you're, in an early startup, you don't really need that. Or if you're in a big company, but you're trying to tackle problems that are different from the ones that LeetCode allows you to tackle, then you focus on something else.
Yeah.
So that's it. And then I would say potential as well, which is it's really hard to spot. But how open and willing it's the person to grow and to learn, and how open is to different technologies. That's also something important to keep in mind when hiring.
Yeah.
And now with AI tooling, I haven't had the opportunity yet, but what I will say is I will observe how they use AI within their workflow. And what I will be interested in, it's how they can maximize the efficiency during their daily job, and maybe even learn from it.
For sure. How is it when you then interview, for example? Because that's what I actually wanted to know. But I'm also interested in the interviewing process. How do you prepare? Because you want to highlight your own skill set and expertise.
Yeah.
You already say LeetCode is not my thing. Do you shy away from early stage companies that do that? I think that might be a red flag, to be honest. But yeah, it is a tactic.
It is. We have to be honest here as well. If you have if you can do that, you have the ability to choose between different companies, then sure, you can filter the ones you don't like, and you filter also based on the process they have, the hiring process. If you have the privilege of doing that, then why not? I usually don't shy away from that because I still see it as a challenge, so it's fine.
Nice.
But as you pointed out, maybe there is a misalignment cultural wise. So then I will try to keep that in mind. And again, depends also on the problem you are trying to solve, right? If you are in a fintech, I don't know, I can imagine you are heavily on algorithmic stuff because you are solving problems that tackle that. So then, yeah, I can totally see that happening. If you are in a product startup where the product is focused on the creative industry, and so it's more about UI, design, etc., then I will focus more on those skills. If you are on the hardware side, maybe you are more interested in serial communication, Bluetooth communication, low-level stuff. So yeah, I will also judge the companies based on how they do hiring compared to what they are trying to build.
Yeah, makes sense. With agentic tooling now in the mix, I feel like things like technical debt can either be solved on the spot or maybe retroactively once we have product market fit, can be solved way quicker than actually having to prioritize something, having to have dedicated time. A week of only technical debt, I don't think is going to be there much more in the future anymore. But companies still need to enable their engineers with tooling, with the right amount of tokens, with the right amount of flexibility to also use the tools. And there I feel like startups and scale-ups really have an edge because there's a lot less engineers and they have a lot more power over product direction, especially if it's a technical company. Is also that how you've experienced it so far?
Let me challenge you there. I see where you're coming from, and I actually agree. I see it myself during my work.
Yeah.
So I usually try to not compromise on technical depth. And now sounds like I'm contradicting myself because initially I said, you gotta have context and make trade-off. What I mean there usually it's I try to negotiate on the features we are trying to build.
Okay.
That's also very important in my opinion. Saying no is also a sign of seniority. And by saying no doesn't mean that, you go in a meeting where you're planning a new feature, they ask you, let's build this feature, and you're like, no.
I don't want to build it.
Yeah, no, I don't want to build it. It's more about negotiating it. So, questioning what is the benefit of this feature, if there is another way we can tackle that. Actually, I joined, I mentioned that I joined Aquablu, and we had a very tough deadline. The first thing I did was set up a meeting where we went over, what we wanted to build. And I was like, okay, this is a no. This is a no, not like this is a no, but this is not going to happen.
It's not going to work.
Like, no, it's not going to work. And then they were like, yeah, okay, what can we do? Especially with seniority, I guess you gain also authority. So then it's easier to kind of negotiate, but I think you still have to earn this and show this up. So then I was like, yeah, what we're trying to build makes sense, but there are a few things we can do here in order to make sure that we are more predictable, and thus I have more chances, or actually I can make the deadline. No, I have more chances. I can make the deadline. And so we started to, negotiate on the UI, for example, some components. I tried to suggest how to simplify existing ones. And they were also super happy with it because, people usually have a lot of fear in saying no or even negotiating, asking questions. But what I try to think in those cases is the other way around. Let's say I say yes, and then I don't make the deadline.
It's on
no
you.
One is not only it's on me, but no one is going to be happy.
Yeah.
Not the other stakeholders, not myself, because I will be, disappointed about myself. The product is not going to launch, so it's also a problem for the company. It's a problem for all of us. So instead, you go there and you say, "Hey, I think this is overly ambitious, but there is a compromise in the middle. I can suggest a few tweaks. You can tell me also what is negotiable and what is not, and then we can take it from there."
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important skill we can build. Now I drifted a bit about your original question. It was
No
technical
worries.
debt.
Yeah.
But to answer that, I was saying, yes, I see it happening in my daily work in the sense that usually what I do is also negotiate on those aspects we already mentioned in order to buy time for myself to not have to compromise on the technical excellence or not too much. So that also means, covering everything with tests and making sure that the code is it's properly covered indeed and tested. With AI too, I am able to deliver faster. So that's pretty nice. But I believe the technical debt is still there because delivering faster also means I can produce way more code.
Yeah.
And so, you're going to end up with technical... the code you write is technical debt by definition. The best code you can write is the code you don't write. That's a famous quote out there. It's a bit... you need to, of course, write code in order to build a product.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is, yes, it's easier to put guide rails, I guess, nowadays. But first of all, you need to have the skills in order to do that. Because you can tell the AI, write unit test. And then, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I'm actually doing that often nowadays. And the unit tests they do, it's often, meh.
Okay.
I even have styles and agents around my code base. So it's customized for that. It gets it right, especially if I use a quite defined prompt. But it happened to me literally this morning when I was writing some unit test, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to speed up this one by asking the AI to generate it. And it literally created 2 unit tests that they made no sense. They were literally creating a class and then verifying that it was not null.
Fair.
Yeah. And there was no value in that. And luckily, I also have an agent for reviewing the code. And that one, first of all, I coded it myself because I reviewed the code. But then the agent also validated it because he said, hey, this test doesn't have any value, so delete it.
Yeah.
If you didn't have that and you didn't review the code like I did, you will be creating technical debt.
Yeah.
Even having AI. So then, I believe nowadays you do have a technical advantage as a startup, but you still need to have people that is skilled enough to judge what's going on and to control this amazing rocket ship that sometimes can drift away and do very bad damages.
Yeah, it's an accelerator in a very interesting way because it doesn't just accelerate you, but it would do something that you would never do, which is then indeed technical debt. If it's not relevant, then it's not relevant, and we do have to clean it up. I agree with that. For me, there are some things that you should never compromise on, and especially with AI tooling, agentic tooling now in the mix, things like unit tests or integration tests, a big test suite, basically, that you can be confident to go live with, to production with, is something we should never compromise on. You should never compromise on that part of your technical excellence to go live faster, unless it is something that you just want to test in production specifically, right? Because then me going through the whole test thing, and even then with agentic tooling, is quite quick. So why compromise on the first place?
I fully agree. I will say, unless also I will add another case, you are in code red, like they say, and so your company is in survival mode and you really need to ship something out there very quickly. But I fully agree with you. Nowadays, is even if you want to put basic guardrails, it's non-trivial with AI, so you should do it.
Even in code red, don't you think it's more risky to be like, we go live with this without tests or integration tests?
Yes, I agree with you, but again, keep the business context. So I don't know how red is the code. If it's extremely red,
there's a shade of red. Yeah, fair.
But I agree with you. It's even with the deadline I had recently, I was actually impressed by myself or by AI or both. I don't know. But
you're still the orchestrator. You have to own that. Yeah.
I still decided to cover all the tests, all the code we test. But I was really impressed because eventually I ended up with a decently covered code base. Integration tests were, I would say, more than decent. Unit tests were totally covered, so really happy with it.
Yeah.
So again, yes, I agree with you. You should be able to. But for example, here is the catch. If I went for the original plan, saying just yes because I'm afraid of saying of negotiating or saying no, or just because I misjudged the amount of work, then I can tell you probably I wouldn't have been able to write at least all the tests. Doesn't mean no test, but maybe some parts of the code base will be uncovered.
It is very strong to say no, but it's the way you say no, right? You say no and you go in an equal level of dialogue and you say, we both want this outcome. We both want the best. This is just not possible. So let's figure out how we can still do this, how we can still make this happen. If people say no, and that's where it ends, then you're going to bump heads.
Yeah, exactly.
Like then it's like, what do you mean no? And how dare you? And why are you here?
And there are
That's
different,
what you don't want.
exactly. And there are also different scenarios, right? Where I saw in the past, and I think I was guilty at some point as well, although not much, was I worked with engineers where they were extremely inflexible on technical excellence, which meant, we need to ship this feature. We really need to do it within 1 or 2 months. And they were like, no, I need to cover, everything and write it in a certain way. So it's no less than 6 months.
Yeah.
And there it's where I say also, negotiating, it's important because we both want the same thing in the end. Also the person coming to you and asking, we need to develop this in a certain time frame, there must be a reason behind it. You can ask. So it's as simple as that. And then you can also negotiate. If you understand the business context, you can even question some choices. This is also something I did recently, and it's also a way of negotiating. So I told you we are building this new machine, and we really have machines out there. They are not Android-based, but there is stuff we can reuse from them, and we want to reuse from them because they are successful. So that makes sense. But then I started, to go through them to get an idea of what we're going to build in the new one. And then I saw some things and I was like, this doesn't really make sense to me. I'm pretty sure there is a reason behind it, but in the new system doesn't really make sense to me. So then again, I wrote everything down. I made a plan. I mapped all the flows that I needed to map. And then I set up a meeting and I asked it, okay, why do we have, I think I ended up with like 10 flows more or less with different features or settings. And then I went there and one by one, I asked, why do we need this? Or what is the consequence of this? And at the end of the conversation, I believe we dropped it 2.
Okay.
So that's 20%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that has so many consequences. First of all, there were 2 things that probably were never used. So I was like, why they're even there?
Yeah.
And actually it makes sense in the previous machine, but in the new one doesn't make any sense. And the second one is, you have to think also long term, right? So everything you write today and you ship today, you're gonna have to maintain. In software, it's we're privileged there as well because we can always update, and delete or fix stuff. With hardware, that's not always the case because once you ship a machine, you can still probably update the assembly line and fix whatever it's problematic. But for machines that are already delivered, you either need to send a technician or, replace the machine, and that's costly for the business. So always think also long-term, within, reasonable terms. So whenever you build something, you're going to have to maintain it. And nobody's perfect here. I do mistakes all time. So more features I have, more chances are that there are going to be errors or, bugs. And so if I can scale them down, which doesn't mean I want to provide less value to the user. I just mean I examine the current product and I say, hey, is this useful? Is this not? Then you can mitigate those problems.
Interesting. You do need an organization that understands that, right? Because if I have no technical background and someone says more features means more bugs, I'd be like, why don't you just make better features? Like it makes no sense.
That's a valid observation. Yeah. Then we go into communication territory as well. Especially when you plan those features, or in general, when you have a meeting within the company, I'm pretty sure, if you're tackling a very technical problem, then probably you're sitting with engineers. But if you're in a product company and you're developing a feature for the product, you will probably have a PM sitting at the table, which may or may not be technical enough to understand.
Yeah.
You will have maybe finance people because they are part of the pricing of the feature. Even when presenting stuff to the company, sometimes you present stuff to the company to show what you did. Some companies do that. And you will have a different audience in front of you. So then it's important to communicate effectively. If I speak with you and you're an engineer, we can talk about backends, servers, etc., etc. Easy, super easy. If we have finance people or people with different backgrounds, then you have to translate that into their language. Hopefully you know how to do that. Or otherwise you use more generic terms. You talk about a server, for example, and you tell them, hey, if the server is down, our product simply doesn't work. That's what they care about. You don't talk about the backend, the API. If the API returns 404, that's too technical for them. So this needs to be applied also when you do those negotiations. And I think it's very important. I think it's something you need to keep in mind always. Communicating effectively, it's very important.
I love that. Yeah. One of the last thoughts I had in mind was, I feel like we as software engineers are on this ever ongoing battle against complexity, basically. And very early on, there's no complexity, right? Because you're starting from nothing, or you're starting from something very small. If you go in big organizations, complexity is already there. It's all around you. So then this technical excellence part, it is really important. But it's also a mindset thing, right? Are you going to go, like you mentioned, if we have hardware as part of something, and it's harder to do a firmware release for specifically that hardware, how much are we going to develop for the future? Because if we still deliver things that we might never use, but we might use in the future, are we then going to incorporate that? Because if we never use it, then it will be the complexity that we have to navigate around. This is the ongoing battle. How have you seen startups or early stage companies, even scale-ups, battle complexity or manage complexity early on?
Yeah, even I will say, if the company is going to be there, you need to ask that yourself, right? When you build long term. So it's a tough question. It's of course an extreme case, but can happen. So that's also usually what happens me in deciding whenever I need to do a trade-off, because I know that dropping or doing a simpler feature is going to deliver this faster to the market, and it's going to buy time and run away to the company. And that's how it goes sometimes, or most of the time, actually. When you're in a startup, you are in survival mode by definition, most of the time. So, you have maybe investors, you are investing in the product. Often you are losing money already. You are not making money yet. So you really need to figure out you have an idea that it's working because it's selling, but it's not selling enough. So then you need to try different things in order to make sure that the outcome is going to be positive eventually for the company. So sure, you need to think long term. You need to avoid. Usually what I do is, if something that will improve an outcome long term has a very small cost or a relatively small cost, then I will implement it right away.
Do it.
Yeah. And by small cost, I mean essentially that doesn't affect my timeline or so on. If you have a big one, then you need to ask yourself, what is the benefit of this? I'm doing this in order to make sure that the product is going to scale properly within 3 years when we have millions of users. Are we even going to get there? Is it worth the extra time I need to invest on it now? Or do I need to focus first on delivering a simple but effective solution and then taking it from there? You're essentially buying yourself time. It's technical debt, yes. But at the same time, it's buying yourself time. Software is there also to evolve, right? So, and this is also one of the privileges we have. Again, if we do the example with the hardware, you ship something, you can always, of course, upgrade the machine, etc. But the hardware that is already out there is going to be very costly to update. Yeah. While with software, you can still release updates without having to go physically there. Doesn't mean it's not going to be costly, because maybe you need to re-architect a service you have, but you have you can buy yourself time. So that's also very important.
You have the flexibility to do so. Has there ever been a a decision you made where you're like, okay, that was the wrong one, or I burned myself here. I shouldn't have implemented that for the long term. I should have gone more for the short term. Anything that you'd like to share there?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think I'm not going to make specific examples, but
you want to keep your jobs, also future jobs?
No, not for me. Maybe actually for others.
Fair enough.
Also for me. But yeah, there were situations where I actually was the other way around. I was advocating for the simpler solution, but people was going for big tech solutions in places that were not big tech, in my opinion. And that ended up, consuming a lot of time within the business and not really giving any result that was justifiable by all the time spent and the time and the resources spent on it.
You went with the big tech solution in the end?
We went with the big tech solution in the end, for something that was barely used.
Yeah.
So then, it's and I was not responsible for that. So I'm not saying this to make myself better.
Yeah.
I was actually trying to fight that, and I also respect that. Yeah, it just happens. I'm pretty sure the other persons had their reasons to go this way.
Yeah.
Maybe they believe it more than me in the future we were building.
Of course.
But I was like, yeah, let's try first, with a fast iteration, and then we can indeed iterate over it. Because if we go fast, you ship and then you see no one uses it, then you have already an answer and you don't invest money and resources on it. Assuming you build a comparable solution, right? Because then you can also build a poor solution and then you could say, yeah, no one used it, but that's because we went with a very poor solution.
Experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm taking that for granted. You go for a comparable solution and then you see if the people or the users are interested in it, and then you can iterate over it. Sometimes it's even interesting because you can build something very simple, thinking I'm going to iterate over it once I see the users use it, but then they start using it, and actually the simple solution it's good enough to let it be. So that's also pretty interesting to see. I really like to be driven by data. You don't always have the possibility to do that. But if you can, I really love to do that because then you have the answers there. Then, of course, sometimes you need to come up with new features and you just have to try. You don't have the data to back that up. You need to try. But that's exactly the point. When you want to try, you want to explore, then try to come up with an MVP and then take it from there.
Yeah. These areas where it's not black and white, but there's a lot of gray, I think they are super interesting. And I've really appreciated you coming on and sharing your insights. I think this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a part of the challenge, and I believe it's really interesting. And it's also, it's very interesting to see it in all aspects. When we talk about MVP or simple solution, it goes also from the engineering point of view. That's also pretty interesting. I remember actually one of your persons you had on the podcast, advocating for simple systems. Yeah, I'm fully on that.
You're on that. Yeah.
I fully agree on that.
Yeah.
I agree. You need to develop first the simplest solution possible, and then iterate over it. You also mentioned it earlier. I wanted to touch upon that. You are in a greenfield project, so there is no complexity, and it's easier compared to joining an existing product, maybe a monolithic, a huge code base where there is already complexity. I agree with you. That's true. But it's also true that in a greenfield project, you can start adding complexity yourself and then
very quickly.
Yeah. So usually what I do when talking technically, I even did that literally yesterday. I do it all the time. I come up with a solution, I write the code, or I use AI to write the code, whatever. And then I come up with a solution, I write the test and everything, validate is working, and I'm like, okay, I'm happy with this. Now let's take a step back. I take a step back, zoom out, and then I say, can I simplify this solution even more than it is already, if it's already simple? And then I start thinking about it. Maybe I tinker with AI, and then I end up refactoring the code more often than not, and ending up with an even simpler solution. And that's pretty interesting. I had something similar literally yesterday. I was building a feature where we need to allow changing languages in the machines. That's pretty understandable, pretty straightforward. But then digging into it and talking with stakeholders, I came to know that we had two ways of changing the language. One is the system language, and one is the session language. So essentially, if you go into the system settings, you change the language, and once you change it, it's reflected in the whole application. That's usually how your phone works, right? Then you have the session language, which is You change the language, you use the machine, and once you go away, the machine goes back to the default language, which is not the same of the session language.
It's the system one.
Yeah, correct. You can see that because, I told you we build vendor machines. So there is a session usually, you interact with the machine, and then there is a reset state. And so I started to build a feature, and I was like, okay, it's a bit more complex than I thought, but still it's just one switch, right? You have season and session, that's it. And then I was like, okay, maybe I need a little util, and then maybe I need two little utils, and then maybe I need something to orchestrate the two things. And then I ended up with like a few classes, and then I was like, okay, the solution is working, is covered with tests and everything. Zoom out, and then I was like, okay, but wait a second, these two classes actually are doing almost the same thing, so maybe I can simplify this even more. And then, long story short, I ended up with a couple of classes, one class, one utility. The class had a couple of dependencies. That's it pretty much. And I even added threading. While doing all this, actually, I even spotted something interesting that was involving the main and the background thread. Not going to go into details, but some operation needed to be done in the main thread, even if I thought they were okay to be done in the background thread. So eventually, I ended up with a single class doing these two little operations and covering everything. And again, I hope now people is not going to jump on me, but you have single responsibility principle, right? So that's how I started actually. I had a class for the different functions. So one was the system setting and one the session setting. But then looking into it, I was like, even single responsibility is debatable. Because if you mix them, if you merge them, you are still doing one thing, which is updating the language of the system. Can be session or can be system related, but it's still just updating the language of the system. And so, eventually I ended up with I was pretty happy with it because the final code was much simpler than the original one. And in this case, it's quite a simple example, I would say. So the gains were probably minimal, but in more complex solutions, when you take a step back, you can end up with a much simplified system. And I think that's very beneficial to both you and the company. And that's also technical excellence in a way.
I think the skill of stepping back, looking at what you've done or what you've generated and then trying to simplify it, is going to be kind of make or break moving towards the organization. Because if this cycle of creating goes faster and faster, then we do need to step back and see what can we simplify to make something that is scalable for the future in the end, but also digestible for people until we get to a point that we don't need to do that anymore, which is also, that's a whole nother conversation.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for coming on, man. This was real fun.
Thanks to you.
Cool. We'll round it off here. If you're still with us, let me know in the comment section what you thought of this episode, and we'll see you next one.